All right, gang, welcome back. This is another video on our Chapter 4 stuff. Hopefully you already watched the previous videos, especially the one on while loops. We're going to continue doing while loops. We're also going to introduce and incorporate the double and the float variable types. We'll show you that here in a second. But again, with the while loops, the idea of a while loop is it is a repetition statement. It takes some code and it repeats it. A common early problem for this would be finding the average of a series of numbers. We're going to set this up to be acting both like a counter controlled loop and also a sentinel controlled loop. And I'll show you both ways, and I'll show you what's necessary to get them working. So I already have my structure in here. Let's start by saying I have a integer total initialized to 0. You can't just declare a total. You have to initialize it because variables in C++ do not start assuming that they're equal to 0. You have to tell it that. I'm also going to need a variable for the number. Now for this one, notice that I didn't have to initialize it. That's because here in a moment, I'm going to enter the number, and then I'm going to take that number and type it in over and over again. If I do 10 numbers, I don't need 10 different variables. Like I don't need num1, num2, num3, num4, num5, num6, num7, num8, num9, num10, because I'm just getting that number to do an average. So I'm adding the number to the total, and then I basically throw it away. Those of you that remember some of the stuff from last year, you might remember doing arrays and lists. Like if I'm going to sort the numbers, yeah, it would be important to store all the numbers, but for this, it's just pure average, and so all we really need is how many numbers are there, and then what's the count of the total. So if I do a while loop, and I say, okay, let's do 10 numbers, all right, well, I need a counter of some kind. So I'm going to go up here again, and I'm going to incorporate a count, which, again, you have to initialize it to 0, because if you don't, it doesn't assume that. It's not a language that assumes your starting variable value. Now, there's some other issues. We're going to keep going while the count is less than, you want 10 numbers? Well, you want to be careful about what's called an off by 1 error. An off by 1 error is exactly that. Are you off by 1? This is a very common mistake in programming. Did you go 1 too many, 1 too few? So if we start at 0 and we're checking to say while the count is less than 10, do I want to say less than 9? Do I want to say less than or equal to 10? Do I want to say less than 11? Like you got to kind of think ahead where you're going to put the check and also where you're going to put the input. Because right now, like when you declare this, you haven't typed a number yet. You're typing in a number right there. So the count is 0, like we haven't typed the number yet. Once we do this, then the count will be 1. And this is where you're going to do count equals count plus 1, which, as we've mentioned, the shortcut for saying type in a number and then add 1 to the count is count plus plus. Nice little shortcut. So you type in a number, and then you increment the count. Will the while loop stop? Is it going to be a loop that stops because the condition becomes false? Well, yeah, because it's 0, and you're saying increment this by 1, and then stop at a certain point. So we know it's going to go up above 10 at some point. But again, you want to remember, is it off by 1? So we'll test it here in a second just to make absolutely certain. The other thing we have is the total. Total is 0, so we have to add the number to the total. So I'm going to increment the count, but also total equals total plus the number, which, little shortcut for this. So just like there's plus plus if you want to do 1, there's minus minus if you want to go minus 1. There's no times times because, like, what would that mean? Times times 1 doesn't do anything. But if you have something like count equals count plus 1, that shortens, but that's with 1. What if it's something else like total equals total plus number? You can shorten this as well. You don't have to, it's just a shortcut. But the shortcut for this, and I'll put it in a little comment so you remember, is total plus equals num. There's a plus equals, there's a minus equals, there is a times equals, there is a divide equals, and there also is a mod equals. If you think back to that digit splitter program, we did that in the last set of programs. You had to say something like number equals number, mod 10,000. Well, here you could just shortcut with these little compound operators. They're called plus equals, minus equals, times equals, divide equals, and mod equals. So let me put those in here, as part of your notes. Oops. The increment operator, again, that's plus plus. That's when you want to say count equals count plus 1. The decrement operator is minus minus. And then the compound operators, typing in the dark, and I'm having a hard time typing apparently. Plus equals, there's also minus equals. As I said, there's times equals, there's divide equals, and then there's also mod equals, which are the shorthand way of saying something like that. So we typed in all the numbers. We incremented the count. We added to the total. We want to get the average. Now, I don't want to calculate average inside because that'd be a waste of time. We don't need to know the average till the end. So down here, if I say the average, well, okay, so average is a variable. We need to declare it. Should we declare it up top? Yeah, we really should. We should always declare variables at the top. But here we're going to introduce the double. I'm going to say double average. And just like number, I'm not going to set it equal to anything because I'm going to calculate it. I only need to initialize accumulators, things that are going to add up, or not really add necessarily, but like they're somehow going to change by doing some math. You're going to add to them, subtract to them. But if you're just going to use them for a later calculation, you don't have to initialize it. Does it hurt to initialize it? No, it does not. But again, I'm just trying to show you the differences. Down here then, if I say the average equals the total divided by the count, and then C out, quote, the average is average, end L. Okay, so there's a few things. Will this work? Maybe, maybe not. Let's test it. This is my little way of saying, like, it might not work. So let's try it. Okay, so it's waiting for me to type in numbers. Fair enough. So I'm going to type in numbers which will give me an average that I know. If I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The sum of those numbers is 55. If you don't believe me, try it. If you've already taken sequences and series in math class, you know the best way to do this. There's 10 numbers on there. The first one and last one add to 11. The second and the second to last add to 11. The third and the third to last add to 11. There's 5 sets of those. 5 times 11 is 55. So 55 is my total. 55 divided by 10 should give me 5.5. It gives me 5. Okay. We set it to double, but there are still some issues. Because while the average is a double, the variables that we use to arrive at that are not. So if you take an integer divided by an integer, it'll still chop off the decimals. That's a problem. So because total and count are both integers, average will not give you a decimal, although it is a double variable type. So how do we fix it? Well, we could cheat, and we could go back up here and make these doubles. But that's not really too proper because count is an integer. Like, you can't get 2.5 numbers to be typed in. Theoretically, the number and the total could be doubles, but I want to keep it this way. I want to keep them all as integers. The fix is something we do called typecasting. Typecasting is changing a variable type to another type. And the way you do it is you put the new type in parentheses in front of the variable. Now, different languages handle this in different ways. You might remember in Python, you had the int parenthesis, the str parenthesis in Visual Basic. In C++ and Java, what you do for the most part is you go down here and you say, I'm going to change this to a double. I'm going to change this to a double. Now, when I say change it, it's not going to make a permanent change. It's just a temporary change just to do the math. If I go ahead and run it, again, did it freeze on me? Tell me it didn't freeze on me. There we go. That was weird. Okay, so one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The average is 5.5. That's accurate. So you have to be careful. Anytime integers and division are involved, you want to be careful of, do you get the proper answer? Don't just assume, make sure you test it. I also want to go back up a little bit. I talked about the off by 1 error. It worked out. It's the way I wanted it to be. The count starts at 0 because as we go into the while loop, we have no numbers. Here we say, okay, I typed in a number, go down to the bottom, now you have count as 1. Is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. And we continue doing that over and over until we get to 9. The count is 9 because you start on 0. And so when you get down here, when 9 is less than 10, it's still going to do it. So when you type in number 10 will be a count of 10. You go down here, it says, oh, count is 10. 10 is not less than 10. So it's going to exit the while loop and then continue down to the bottom. So you have to be careful here. If I started at 1 and went up to and included 10, that's the same. Count on your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The same thing. The ranges are the same whether you start 0 and go up to but don't include that number, or go 1 and up to and include the number, it still works out the same way. Okay. I also, because I kind of glanced over it, the double variable type. These are decimals, and there are other types of decimals. There is also a type called float, which again you might remember from back in Python. A float is also a decimal, but these versus double type, we just usually use double type. They take more memory, but they hold more decimals. Typically this holds about 7 decimals and this holds about 15 decimals. The reason they're called doubles is because they are double precision floating point numbers. So a float is almost like a single and a double is like a double float. Do you have to really worry about that? No, but essentially, just like in Visual Basic, we're going to use integer and double as our whole number and our decimal variable types. There are others, we'll get to those, but right now we're just doing this quick little math, so we're going to stick with integer and double. Got it? Okay. All right, so we have now a program that does a counter-controlled style. We knew ahead of time there's going to be 10 numbers, right? So in this way, it's kind of like a for loop. While loops and for loops can act like each other. It's more so like we talked about in the notes, counter-controlled versus sentinel-controlled. Counter-controlled, a definite loop is when you know ahead of time how many steps there are going to be. A indefinite or a sentinel-controlled, you don't know. Like if I take a die and I say roll this die 5 times, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that's it. If I say roll this die until you get a 6, it could happen the first time, or it could happen many times after that. It could happen 10 times from now, 100 times from now. You just don't know. So this style here is the style where it's a counter control. Again, it's definite. We know there are 10 numbers. Period. No more, no fewer, just 10. We used a count. So what if we do it then with a sentinel controlled style, where we don't know how many numbers to average. Back this up a little bit. Again, we call this an indefinite loop. Got it? So how is this different? Well, let's do this. I'm going to reset my stuff. I'm going to say set my average back to 0. Notice I didn't redeclare it. I just said like average is 0, not int average or double average. I just said average is 0. I'm going to set my total back to 0. I'm going to set my number back to nothing. I'm going to set the count back to nothing. So everything is from scratch. Got it? Now, some of those things I don't even need to do. Count, I'm not even using a count for this, but I am. See, I got you there. I'm using a count because I still, when I do the average, I need to know how many there are going to be to do the average. So I can't just say the loop's not based off of it, but my average is. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Total obviously needs reset, average needs reset. So here's how this works. Let's say we do something like enter a series of numbers to average, and then we'll type 0 to quit. So that's like our terminal value, that's our sentinel value. So our loop is going to look like this. While the number is not equal to 0, keep looping, keep repeating until you enter 0. All right. So here's the thing though. Right now, number is 0. So will this loop ever run? Nope, it won't. All right, guys, I have to apologize. I had a little toddler emergency there. If you saw seconds ago in the video, I looked down at my phone. And anyway, long story short, if the background behind me is different, that's because I'm in a different spot and it's hours later. So where was I? I was talking about this while loop. We're talking about the indefinite loop with the average. And so, as I was saying, the number currently is 0. The loop was going to be skipped because the number is equal to 0, which the while loop says, like, while it's not 0. Well, if it's 0, it's going to skip it. So what I'm going to do is actually input the number before the loop starts, because that's my sentinel value. It's the number that determines whether the loop runs at all or not. So when I type in a non-zero number, it's going to go into the loop. So here's the thing. I'm sorry this is so choppy. This is my third attempt now. There's a little glitch in the last minute. I was frozen, so hopefully that comes out in the video. Anyway, let's continue. So you have the input of the number before the while loop, and as I was saying before I got cut off again, inside the while loop, you are going to accumulate. So you've typed in one number. So you hit count plus plus. You have entered a number, so you're going to add it to the total. Total plus equals number. But because you're in a while loop, you have to somehow change the condition to exit it. Otherwise, it'll be an infinite loop. You'll have to type in a number somewhere somehow. Right now, the input is outside the loop. So I know this is going to seem strange, but you're actually going to enter the number at the bottom of the while loop. Because if you think about the flow of this, this is the original entry point. So you're testing the original number against the loop condition. Then you do the math. Then down here, this is where you enter the next number to say, is it going to be 0 or is it not? So if I put a little note here about that. Again, if you're doing a sentinel loop of some kind, enter the first value to test above the loop. In the loop, again here, test that value. The loop won't run if this is false. And then down here, do whatever you need to do in the loop So in this case, we're doing average. So we're going to calculate the average, to count in the total at least. And then down here at the bottom, ask once again for the test, in other words, the sentinel value. So once you type in a 0, it's going to be leaving the loop, and then you come down here and once again you say the average equals converting the total to a double for decimal purposes, converting the count also. I'm sure some of you are going to ask, like, do you have to do the conversion with both? If it's mixed and matched, like if you have one double and one integer, it will actually what's called upcast. It will convert the lowest level of variable type to a higher. So integer is lower than a double because it holds fewer things, like just the whole numbers, whereas doubles hold all of those plus more. So if you have a mixture like a double and an integer, it'll go up to a double. So do I have to put that on both of them? I don't. I'm just going to put it there just for show's sake. And then at the bottom, print out the average, and let's test this thing out to make sure it works after all this chaos of this video, stopping, starting, restarting, restopping. All right, so the original 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, average 5.5. Okay, so now let's just do a few tests. If I type in 1 and 2, the average 1 and 2 is 1.5. Put in 0, it gives me 1.5. If I try it again, just to test it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What happens if I type 0 at the very beginning? So at least it didn't crash or anything, but when you type in 0, that negative NANIND, you're trying to divide by 0 basically. If you go back to our values, you have count equals 0 here. Well, then the problem is you're dividing by 0 here. So it's not going to be giving the answer, but there are ways to deal with that later, which we'll look into. The general purpose, though, of this video is to show you the looping and the structure of that. So typing in 0 skips that entirely, whereas putting in numbers, it'll quit when you put in 0. So that'll wrap up the chapter 4 stuff. You're going to be doing some programs based off of this material in the future. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take care.